You guys pumped up? You like that song, right? You guys, this is such a great day, and I learned a lot. I've already taken a lot of notes, so I need to go back to work and ask for a raise immediately. I need to break some rules, work on some of those likability traits, right? So I got a lot to do, but you guys have notebooks in front of you, and this is a really unique day because, like Mandy had mentioned and really built up this panel, they're over there kind of going, geez, expecting a lot from us today, right? We're here to kind of get real, right? Let's share some stories. Let's really get into some of the goodness about what makes women successful and really share. And so take some notes, get curious. You have an idea, write it down. We're going to have a Q&A a little bit afterwards. I'm going to ask some questions first, and then we'll take a quick break, and then we'll open it up. And so I want you to just really take this time to think about your experience and relate to their experience and how you can, better yourself. But this is exciting. So did everybody get coffee? By the raise of hands, who's not on a pure diet or cutting out caffeine? Because I just can't do it. Not at this stage of my life. But coffee's in the back. You guys got the restrooms. We're all set. Okay. Any questions? Any concerns? All right, let's get started. So we're gonna call up our panelists, and then they're gonna do their own introductions. So if I could just have all three join me up here. All right, so we've got Erica, Laura, and Danielle. Yeah, just sit on the couch. All three of you, we're gonna get cozy. Stuff's getting real right now. So you guys showered, you're good? All right, sweet. So we are going to start off with Erica. She's gonna do a quick intro about her, and then we'll just move it down the line, and once everybody gets to know everyone, we'll start with the questions. So go for it, Erica.
Hello. All right, good morning. So this is my second year here at the Women's Summit, and last year, Mandy, woo-woo, right? Last year, Mandy opened up with today's start was the what is the path to your peak, right? I got it? So the path to your peak. So I would think about that as the path to your peak as we're going through the panel today. So my name is Erica Edwards. I work for PepsiCo. I've been there 12 years today. I'm going to take you back to bring you forward. I'm going to do everything Erin told me not to do. That's all right. No, that's fine. So, because I think it's core to who I am, right? And I think it'll resonate as I take you through. So I'm from California. I live in Los Angeles today, but was born in Madera, California. Anybody know Madera? Yep. Whoop, whoop. Hey. So born in Madera, 22 miles outside of Fresno. Was raised in San Francisco, went to high school in Fresno, and then went to college in Los Angeles. So complete California girl, right? And that's important because I'm going to say that's going to be something that I'm going to keep coming back to. For me, I'm an only child. My parents, they're both from California. My dad was an officer in the Air Force. My mom was a model. She modeled for 20 years, was one of the first African-American female to have a national modeling contract where she did print ads activity. Very extreme different careers, and so it took them in two different paths, and they divorced. But I would say that I am definitely a product of both of those. One, it's very conservative in some ways, and then one is fly by the seat of their pants, that kind of thing. That is me at its core. I went to USC college, and from when I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. I played sports, didn't know what type of doctor, but I tore my ligaments in high school and knew that I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And so I basically went to college, was sports medicine degree, and then graduated and got accepted to med school and was going to go to UC Davis. And again, I'm an only child. And about 3 days after I graduated, my dad told me he had stage 3 cancer. And so I basically made a decision once I understood the type of cancer he had colon cancer. Once I understood what that entailed and that he needed to, have surgery, that I made a choice to stay with my dad. I'm an only child, right? And so I spent about 24 months with my dad, but he's alive today. And it was definitely an experience that I'll never change. And so that is core to me and what keeps me in California. And so I share that is because stay true to yourself is my first lesson. And you'll hear about how that sort of resonated in my career. So for me, my first gig out of deciding that I wasn't going to become a doctor, it wasn't that I didn't decide it, but I had asked for extension at med school. I was granted 1 year, but then when I had to take another one, I wasn't granted. I was taking time for someone that needed to go to medicine school. So for me, once I needed a gig after my dad was doing better, my best friend was working for UPS, and she said, "Hey, come work for UPS. You can do part-time, and you can figure out what you want to do." And so that's what I did. I worked there about 8 months, and then I went to a career fair, and I struck up a wonderful conversation with the VP of HR for General Mills and invited me to their booth. 3 days later, was invited to a plant, Yoplait yogurt plant. I did a tour, and I fell in love with making products. And so that's how I started my career within a CPG company kind of space. So it was just, people ask me today, don't you regret not being a doctor? No, it's very stimulating, and every day is very different. So where's my Tesla people in the room, the plant people, right? So I resonate with you. So I basically grew up in a plant, so I started up in General Mills. I went through a quick, what I would say, like a campus hire program, where I started in the off shift. I was, receiving processing, milk receiving processing, then went into the manufacturing side, had the maintenance teams and the processors under me, and then became, sort of a team leader 3, we called it, where you had your quality, your maintenance, and your manufacturing under you. I worked with General Mills for 5 years. My last role there was leading an $80 million expansion, where we added, U-shaped cell lines with self-manufacturing in that Yoplait yogurt facility, and then really left there because I'm from where? Right. And if you know anything about General Mills, to become a plant director, which I knew I wanted to do, I had to go to Cedar Rapids. I had to learn cereal, right? And that's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Milwaukee, Buffalo, New York, and no offense, but those are all places that I didn't want to go, right? So, so I basically made a decision to leave General Mills, and I looked up and found PepsiCo. And the one thing that I loved about PepsiCo was I could go up and down California, and I could have a career in multiple different spaces. And so I joined PepsiCo as a completely out of my wheelhouse now. So I had been sort of in the technical side. I joined as a warehouse manager from the PepsiCo space, was in that role about 2 years, and then went into the manufacturing manager role, and then a senior apps manager role, which has both warehousing and manufacturing under you, and then to a plant director. Where I sort of hung my hat was in my second plant director role, which was a state-of-the-art facility that we made as PepsiCo. And that's where I met Mandy. I was the plant director at the Las Vegas facility, and was basically tasked with taking it from running, we were a state-of-the-art facility, but we were running like a Yugo, and I needed to make it run like a Bentley, right? And so that's what we did, and it became the best plant 3 years in a row under my leadership. Was then, and it really was all about people. And then from that role, I became the senior director of M&W for the California region, and it also included Nevada. So it's really that West Coast print that Mandy put up when she was going through her presentation. So I was in charge of that same footprint. All those plants reported into me, and we had the Gatorade and sort of all the bottling facilities reporting into me. And that's where we went through that transformation that Mandy talked about, so I won't talk about that, but that was really a successful opportunity for that leadership, the leadership that was selected to lead through that time frame. And so my sort of region was in the manufacturing warehouse, was #1 2 times in a year as my leadership. And so from there, I didn't know where I wanted to go because I had kind of grew up in a very vertical space in the manufacturing warehouse within PepsiCo. And the SVP came to visit me and said, "Hey, what do you want to do next? And I said, I think I want to understand why headquarters builds all these strategies and deploys them to the field and they don't work. That's what I said. I want to know where those come from. But that was just kind of me having a transparent conversation with him, but being very transparent. And really, like 4 to 6 weeks later, they put me in a strategy role for the entire NABQ. And so what I would tell you about that is my second lesson is ask for what you want. So the first one is be true to you. The second one is ask for what you want. And in asking for what I wanted, I asked if I could stay in California and do the role. Okay? So I do sacrifice, I did travel a lot. So I became the senior director of strategy for NABQ, which was really North American Beverages and Quaker at that time. It was a horizontal position where I grew up in a very vertical space. So now I'm dealing with, your sales organization, your delivery organization. I'm delivering with a significantly larger, broader footprint. And question myself multiple times, like, what did I get myself into? But realized I had a great perspective at the table, and I wouldn't have been asked to put in this role. And from that, what's great is a lot of the strategies that, sort of ideated from new space, new person being in charge of what we're actually executing now. So it's been pretty phenomenal. And then the last 6 months, I have been in a new role, which is the VP of Customer Service and Strategy, which even took me further out of my wheelhouse, which is now I'm closer to the customer. And so what I would say is, though, leading a lot strategy agenda and getting closer to the customer, it's one that's actually, it's very much growth for me because, as we're getting into an e-commerce space, there's significantly more transformation with technology, and that's all something that PepsiCo is very slow to move on. It's like taking a 747 and needing it to be a jet, right? And trying to turn it very quickly and to get to a technical space.
I know some people that could help you out with that.
Yeah, we can talk. So that's a little bit about me. What I would say, my 3 lessons are: be true to you, because I've always kind of, in my current role, I'm still living in California. Okay, my team is remote. I do travel. But be true to you. For me, I want to be a throws away from my parents. I'm an only kid. I took time early to invest in my dad, and we have the best relationship, and I went and changed that in the world, and that's something that I truly enjoy. 2 is ask for what you want. And 3, don't second guess yourself. I'm in a role today, I know nothing about the customer, but I'm making value-added changes to drive change within our organization. And so those are my 3 lessons, and those are a little bit about me.
Great. Give it up for Erica Edwards. Nice. I'm surprised we didn't have California Girl. I mean, really, right? It's like this would be perfect.
How hard it's been. It's time to be awesome. This dull routine we've been forced to do.
Don't let them rob you of who you are. Be awesome, it's all up to you.
Like it.
You know that song?
I don't, but I do like it.
Who's seen the My Little Pony movie? Yes. Be awesome. So I actually chose that song. It's my daughter's favorite song. And no, I'm too old. I won't date myself either, but been in HR over 20 years, so you can do the math. I took my daughter to see that movie, and I was too old to get into My Little Pony when they first came around, but I remember thinking, what is this, right? But we went to see the movie, and she got into the TV series, and I was like, wow, this is all about female empowerment. Like, if you look at the characters and what they're doing, I was like, this is awesome. So I actually sit and watch it with my daughter, and sometimes I have been known to keep it on after she leaves the room, because, come on, it's pretty catchy. So Laura Woolford, I'm the Senior Director of Human Resources for the Gigafactory for Tesla here in Reno. I also own Giga 2 in Buffalo, New York. It's one of those typical things that seems to happen in my career, and maybe it's happened to you, where you're hired for one job, and then they're like, oh, but can you do this too? And then maybe this. And oh, well, hey, let's just have you add some more stuff on too. I was actually asked this morning if I could help out with some stuff in the Bay Area. And I'm like, sure, why not? But I've been in HR, like as I said, for over 20 years. I'm originally from the Midwest, from Indiana, but I am a nomad. This is my 11th state that I've lived in. And that's kind of, when I think about, your lessons that you had, mine is, it's like I just kind of became a free spirit. I grew up a GE brat. My dad was with GE for 22 years, and they moved us a lot. I kind of got used to every 2 years, all right, where are we going to go next? And I used to find that if I was in a town for longer than 2 years, I got itchy. I was like, ooh, we need to move. We need to go somewhere. I want to see something new. But originally, it was all in the Midwest. Well, then they moved us to California in the 80s. And this was a whole new world. And I lived, for anyone who's spent any time over on the coast, I was in Half Moon Bay. And this was before Half Moon Bay had a McDonald's. Like, they built a McDonald's as we were leaving, and I'm like, oh my God, civilization has come to Half Moon Bay. But for me, that was like a pivotal point in my life because, I'd left Indiana, moved to Half Moon Bay, where, frankly, in our town, I was the minority. And, it was an old Filipino fishing village, and there were so many different ethnicities and backgrounds and experiences, and I loved it. And then I moved back to the exact same town and school that I'd gone to in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I had to make all new friends because the group that I used to be friends with, they expected me to be the same, and I wasn't the same anymore. That experience fundamentally changed who I was. And so I kind of learned that you kind of make your own way. You make your own friends. You make your own family in some ways. You kind of chart your own course. And that's stayed with me throughout my life. Of course, after 18 months back in Fort Wayne, we moved again. And then as I started college, we moved again. So home kept moving all around the country for me. Undergrad at Purdue, I thought I was going to be a marine biologist and save the whales, right? So this experience in California, I'm like, no, you might laugh, Purdue, landlocked state, there's maybe some river, the Wabash River runs through, but that's about it. But I'm like, I'll start in biology, and then I'll go back to California, and I'll go to UC Santa Cruz, and I will save the whales, and it's going to be awesome. Halfway through my freshman year, I was at School of Science, and at Purdue, like many big universities, you have your weed out courses that first year. And so I was in classes with engineers, and I still remember sitting Chem 115, look to the left, look to the right. By the end of the semester, these people won't be here. I was one of those people. I seriously, after the first exam, I went to career counseling. I'm like, I got to get out. Like, you got to get me into something else. And so I did all the career tests and what color's your balloon or parachute or whatever. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going liberal arts. And by the time I graduated, and I did do it in 4 years, which is amazing, I was a history and sociology major. And I'm like, what am I going to do with that, right? So I moved back in with my parents in New Orleans. And I worked in social work. And I worked in social work for free with first-time offenders being referred over from the DA's office in Covington, Louisiana, which if you've ever been north of New Orleans, it's like a huge dichotomy of really rich, really poor. And going through that experience, I said, ooh, yeah, I do not want to get a master's in social work. Like, I am not cut out for this. So I chose HR instead, which my dad says is still social work. But at least I'm paid more, but not enough. So, I mean, I am a little worried because I do have a lot of my fellow friends here. They're all going to ask me for a raise when we go back, and I'm going to ask for a raise as well. So we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I started in HR, and frankly, I kind of knew at that point it was either going to be social work or HR. My dad had some phenomenal experiences in his life through GE, layoffs, plant closings, cuts, where he had HR really help him along the way, and that impacted me. I mean, he lost his job my freshman year in college, so he was out of work for a year. So it was that was very a pivotal moment for me. So fast forward, I got my master's in HR. This was my chosen path. Some people think I'm crazy, but I actually like it. And I'm not in it because I like people, although I do like people. But it's more about helping them kind of fulfill their potential, right? And whether it's a layoff situation or a hire situation, helping people figure out, how they can move forward and find that path for them is something that I think is really rewarding for me. Worked for 2 companies. I was determined not to work for GE. I was not going to do it. And then they recruited me and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so I spent 17 years there. Again, wasn't in the plan, but I've kind of learned to fly by the seat of my pants and just kind of go wherever I need to go. For me, I didn't have that straight vertical path to senior leadership. I really enjoyed getting different experiences and building my toolkit. And so I had colleagues of mine, and it was tough. I had colleagues of mine who got promoted a lot faster because they stayed in one part of GE and they kind of climbed the ladder. But for me, I enjoyed meeting new people, learning new industries, and I was in some of the coolest stuff. I mean, I started, before GE, I worked for Shell and Corning, so I was in optical fiber, I was in oil. But at GE, I got to be in medical, and we were saving lives. I worked in capital, where we were, funding small businesses all over the US. I worked in aviation for the majority of my career for 9 years. We were building jet engines, right? So, I mean, that was pretty cool. And then my last stint with them was in transportation. We were building locomotives and creating the next gen of locomotives that were reducing emissions. But what I found is that, during that career and that path, I met my husband, met him online on a dare, and had a
we may have to go deeper into this a
yeah,
little later.
Yeah, we might.
It's a good story there.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, there's some, might be over a drink later.
You got your drink tokes, right?
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
In the,
yeah.
in,
Can we
put
get
them
more?
inside here.
So, met my husband. We had 3 children. Unfortunately, our first child passed away. And that was a pivotal moment for me, especially in the workplace, learning that who I was before that happened and who I was after, I changed. And I think that's when I also learned how to be even more vulnerable in the workspace. And I can go into more of that later. But my kids are everything for me. And so in my last role, we were in Fort Worth, Texas, and I kind of got to that point where I could see my path, right? I could have stayed with GE. My stock was worth nothing, but I could have stayed there, and I would have had a very nice life. But I wasn't fulfilled. There was something missing. And I was looking at my kids, and I said, what am I doing? If I'm spending all this time at work, I want it to be for something that's bigger than me. I want it to be for something that's going to make a difference in the world. And so Tesla actually had reached out 2 times before. They're very persistent. Once they kind of latch on to somebody and they're interested in you, they will make you talk to them. And so the 3rd time, I actually talked to them, and I said, okay, what's going on? And they're like, hey, remember this job we called you 2 years ago? We still haven't filled it. Are you interested? Will you talk to us? And what stood out for me, as crazy as you see in the media and everything, I try to ignore all that because, frankly, it's about we're trying to change the world. And we're trying to leave this planet better than it is today. And that's important for me, for my kids. Because at some point, right, fossil fuel is going to roll out. We're doing a lot of things that personally, whether you believe or not, I think we're really hurting this planet. And I felt like I could get behind this and it could really resonate for me. And my kid calls me a superhero. And because she's like, you're saving the world. I'm like, yes, I am. So even on those tough days, we just put on My Little Pony and we talk about how awesome we are. And that's really what it's all about for me.
Nice. Keep working on that stock. I'm a huge fan. All right, Laura Woolford, everyone.
Give it to me.
Danielle Rees, and I am a female founder. Do we have any other entrepreneurs in the room? Yes. Awesome. So I don't know if there's a traditional path to becoming an entrepreneur, but certainly going through the ski industry and the nonprofit sector is definitely not it. So do I have any other nonprofit directors? I know Haley's in the back. Yes? Anyone else who's works in the nonprofit industry? Yes, yes, welcome. Okay, I'm sure many of you serve on boards, so thank you all for that. So I want to start at the beginning. So in the 70s, my mom and my dad met skiing at Squaw Valley. Okay, I lied. My mom, a Pan Am flight attendant, picked up my dad, a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford, from the bar après ski. Yes, okay. So skiing has always been a part of our lives, but what I wanted to talk about was how my dad, he founded his own tech company, so software engineering, and moved to Atlanta, Georgia to start that. And my mom, being a flight attendant, could work from anywhere that had an airport. So they moved to Atlanta, where my brother and I were born. And we spent a lot of time coming to Tahoe and to California. And when my brother was starting middle school, my parents wanted us to move, or my mom really wanted us to move back. She'd been wanting to move back to California all along. She did not fit in with the Southern Belles. And so we grew up in California. And because my mom was a flight attendant for Pan Am, I got to travel the world before bankruptcy, right, of Pan Am, and I'll date myself, and so that was when I was a freshman in high school. So when I was 12, we had this amazing trip. We went to Kenya and did the safari and saw the Big Five, and we got to go visit a Maasai village. So imagine the dung-covered huts, the children with flies in their eyes, the National Geographic photos, right, of this, and the cows are all in the center of the village because that's the most prized possession. And I'm 12, and I'm meeting girls who are my age, who have been circumcised, whose fathers have arranged marriages for them with older men in exchange for cattle. So for me, at the young age of 12, I realized that I was very privileged and fortunate to have been born in the United States and to have the opportunity for education and to have choice over my own life and what I wanted to do. And so that really stuck with me. So flashing forward to when I'm at Stanford and I'm trying to figure out my major. Now my dad, having been an entrepreneur and started his own successful business, which he eventually sold to Ross Perot, and that was part of the Enron family, right? So the two lessons I learned from my dad about running your own business and working in the corporate world was that when I was little, I thought it was really fun to go into my dad's home office and interrupt him, knowing that he would say, "Sure, honey, whatever you want." So I went into the office, and he barely glances up from his little accounting calculator. He's crunching numbers in the evening, and I think I was about 8, and I asked if I could have $1 million. And what did my dad say? Whatever you want, right? But what I really wanted was for my dad to spend time with me, right? That's what I wanted. But I think I learned a lesson there that that money doesn't bring happiness, and that ultimately I'm not driven by money. The other thing that I learned from my dad was when we moved to California, he continued commuting to Atlanta for another 8 years. And so he really missed out on my brother and I, in middle school and high school, and my parents' marriage was very strained. And so I thought, I don't want to be an entrepreneur when I grow up. I don't want to go into business. And so when I'm in college and picking a major, I decided that I wanted to study psychology and human biology because I felt passionate about advancing the status of women and girls and wanted to do that through education and health. So my dad had a conversation with me. He was so excited that I was doing AP Calculus when I was, in high school, because he didn't get to do that till he was a freshman at Caltech, and he thought I was going to be an engineer and everything was great. And so when I told him what I was deciding for my major, he said to me, "Well, honey, I just want you to understand that there are some fields that go into careers that make money, and there are others that do not." And so I stuck to my education, and I had an opportunity to volunteer abroad. I did a summer internship in Ecuador, and I lived with a host family out in rural Ecuador We had electricity, but no running water. Of course, I got Giardia. I did turn down the opportunity to milk a cow. I kind of regret that. But I lived with this host family, and I thought I was going to be planting trees and teaching environmental education. And what I learned was that the teacher there was pregnant and often going to doctors, which was a multiple bus ride trip out of that community. And so the 2-rooms elementary schoolhouse was often empty. And so I started teaching in the elementary school on the days that she wasn't there. And then when she was there, then I was in the other classroom on the other side teaching the K through 3rd grade. And so I didn't really have a clear training on that, but I figured it out, and it was what the community wanted, and it felt really impactful and meaningful. And so that's when I added the second major in human biology and thought that there might be something there for me in a teaching career. So the other key experience I had when I was in college was that I had an opportunity to do a summer semester with NOLS, the National Outdoor Leadership School, and I fell in love with the outdoors. So my mom's idea of the outdoors was for us to go to Yosemite and stay in the Ahwahnee and then go for a hike and come back and dine at the Ahwahnee, okay? So she loved beautiful places, but like 5-star hotels as a Pan Am flight attendant. So I'd never slept under the stars. I'd never, carried a full backpack. And so that was a transformative experience for me. I really found myself in the mountains. The focus was really on being present and just doing the task at hand. And so when I was graduating from Stanford, I asked my parents for a graduation gift that they would give me a week-long whitewater rafting guide school. And so I did that, and still thinking I was going to teach, I went to a job interview in San Francisco. Now, how many of you have gone into San Francisco in the summertime? Yeah, so I left the bright, sunny, warm river, and I drive into the cold fog, and it's a big concrete building with like no windows, and I talked to a bureaucrat, and it was like just the least inspiring interview ever. And right away I decided there's no way in hell that I'm moving to San Francisco to teach. And so I drove back up to the river, and much to my parents' dismay, decided I was going to give it a go as a whitewater rafting guide. So I worked on rivers. I experienced a lot of things that I hadn't experienced before as far as sexism and harassment. Being the only female in a group of men has its challenges. I also found some amazing male allies, and so we can talk about this thread later. So I worked on rivers in California. Then I had the opportunity to travel to the East Coast to raft down the Class 5 Gauley River. And then I traveled down the Grand Canyon through the Colorado. So some amazing, very technical, beautiful whitewater. And I asked my fellow river guides what they did when the rivers dried up. And so that's what led me to moving to Lake Tahoe and working as a ski and snowboard instructor. And so I had to hustle and have multiple jobs doing that. Living the dream is juggling 3 jobs, living in one of the most beautiful places in the world. So I worked in restaurants, and I also substitute taught and worked as the ski instructor. And I decided to apply to grad school in public health with a focus on international health. And I figured this is going to buy me another year of working seasonally, which it did, which was fabulous. And I had the opportunity to work for Outward Bound, so I was leading groups of high school-aged youth backpacking and rafting in Utah and Colorado. So when I got to graduate school, I had a meltdown on the first day. I was in a concrete windowless tower that has since been torn down, and being inside and in a lecture setting was incredibly painful for me, but I kind of breathed through it. I had a good friend, and I found some teachers and some classes that I really liked. At this time, my parents had separated, and my mom was diagnosed with ALS. So I felt very fortunate to be in the Bay Area, close to where I grew up in Silicon Valley, so that I could be there for my mom and help support her in navigating these waters. And the challenge with ALS is that you really don't know that it's a steady decline, but you just don't know the timing of it. And I felt like I couldn't plan my life. I felt like I couldn't leave my mom, and I really wanted to be there for her, but I had that kind of struggle of the values of family and then my own independence in what I wanted to do in my career. And I ended up dedicating my thesis to my mom the last week because it was based on a trip that we had done together to Burma and working with it was on internally displaced populations and childhood diarrhea. If anyone wants to talk about that later, let me know. It's the leading cause of infant mortality. And so at that time, I didn't know what was next, and I was wrapping that up, and I got the phone call that my mom had passed. And so I had a very intense final week in graduation, and then I had an opportunity that I was able to apply to go to Guatemala to work for a small NGO in doing rural community health. And while I was there, it was a similar experience to Ecuador, living very tightly knit with the community. And what I realized is that working in international public health in general as an American means you're working for a huge multinational organization and living in a big urban city, which in lesser developed countries just exacerbates the problems of crime and poverty and pollution, and really isn't that romantic, idyllic, rural thing. And the other thing I noticed was that since my mom had passed away, everyone in my family was getting married, and I really wanted to set down some roots in the States. So I moved back, and I moved to Tahoe again and worked seasonally as I tried to figure out how I was going to get a job in my career of public health. So after 6 months working a winter, where I also happened to meet my husband, working at the Lake Tahoe Brewing Company, and I got a job at Planned Parenthood as a community educator in Reno. And so I moved up there to manager and director, and I really thrived in being able to combine my strengths. I actually really got pumped by securing as much federal money for comprehensive sexuality education during the Bush administration as possible. That was a real driving force for me, and I was very motivated by that. And then there, someone in Tahoe who was managing the satellite health centers was transitioning on to something else, and I thought, ooh, I want to do that also, right? And so I approached my supervisor about combining positions, and so I was able to do both in running the teen pregnancy prevention programs in Northern Nevada and then also the health centers in Tahoe. And everything was going awesome. I was growing, and it was really a fabulous time of growth and very exciting in my career. And then there was a major transition in the leadership. And there were external political and economic factors going on at the time, the changing conversation around healthcare, and I just didn't know what was going on as a middle manager in a 1,000-person organization. But what I did know was that fighting the external forces when it was the Bush administration against what I believed in and fighting for the money for my programs and services felt good. But fighting internally to advocate for my community and for my staff and my programs just wore me down. And I completely burned out. And so when I finally decided to let it go, and my worst fear did happen, the positions over 2 years dissolved all but 3 and closed down the satellite health centers. That was rather devastating for me, but I went back to Tahoe and worked again as a ski and snowboard instructor. Yes,
I'm seeing a trend here.
Yeah,
seasonality.
A trend.
All right.
And so then the next step was I started volunteering in nonprofits in the outdoor industry. And so I got a job working as a course director for Adventure Risk Challenge, which is essentially an outward bound style program for English language learner youth in Tahoe. And then I was a coach for Girls on the Run, where it's a life skills program where girls learn leadership development while training for a 5K run. And I joined their board. And then I was hired as their executive director. And so as the executive director for Girls on the Run in the Tahoe Truckee community, I saw the opportunity and wanted to bring that program here to Reno. And so I was able to successfully do that and grow the organization and grow the program from 100 girls to 500 girls and bring it into low-income schools. And that was incredibly rewarding, and growing our staff and growing the board. And then it was time to move on. There were just different signs coming up that it was time to look for something else. And I was approached by Jen, who I'd worked with at Adventure Risk Challenge, with this harebrained idea of starting a ski and snowboard company. And I thought, one, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. 2, I'm really busy running this nonprofit. And 3, yes, I'm totally in. How are we going to make this work? So for the first 2 years, as I was working full-time for Girls on the Run and we were rapidly growing, I worked nights and weekends as the CFO. So spreadsheets, budgets, financial projections, and raising money, right? So reaching out to friends and family. And let's just say that was like slowly killing me. Working the 2 jobs, not getting to be outside and doing the things that I loved was really difficult. And so for a while, I wasn't sure which direction I was going to go in, but I ultimately decided to take the leap of faith and leave my job, my steady paycheck, a small nonprofit, but good paying job with benefits, to go all in at the startup where there was no money for my position, and just trusting that we'd be able to raise the money. And so at that point, it was a huge leap of faith, and I started working in operations and learned a lot. I mean, incredibly steep learning curve, right, in operations. And so after doing that, I feel like it's my time to wrap up, so I'm trying to speed up here, so Erin, thanks. So in Coalition Snow, we had one really big winter. Do you guys remember 2 years ago? It snowed a lot. Yes, okay, it snowed a lot. And then last winter, not so much. Yeah, so my business partner and I, we didn't want to sell off more equity in the company to be able to continue to pay for all 4 positions year-round, and so I made the decision to step back. So I chose after this last winter to step back into a board role, so I'm no longer in the day-to-day operations at my company. And although on Instagram and LinkedIn, it looks like a seamless transition from that to what I'm doing now, let's just say there was an identity crisis there of like, oh my God, what am I doing with my life and what's next? But the great opportunity that arose from that was for me to partner with Amber Barnes at StartHuman to grow her business. And StartHuman's purpose is to rehumanize the workplace. And as someone who's personally experienced burnout at multiple times during my career, the idea that I could go to work and come home and have more energy for my life than when I started it the day really excited me. And having worked with a lot of leaders in different realms, in different roles, I was just really thrilled to be able to do that leadership work with her. And so the other thing that I've started is the Audacity Fund, which trying to raise money for a capital-intensive manufacturing business is exceptionally challenging to raise money. And it is especially even more so challenging to do that as a female-founded company. And so I identified that what I wanted to do after Coalition Snow was to launch a fund where we would invest in local women and female founders so that they could have successful businesses and grow them. And so I partnered with Kelly Northridge, and we've launched the Audacity Fund so that we will be educating investors in angel investing and alternative investments, and we'll be investing in underserved founders, whether that's female founders or people of color, and we're doing that here in Reno this fall.
Woo! Danielle, Rees, everyone. Thank you. All right, just a quick time check, make sure we're good. You guys got to know our speakers now, so here comes the hardball questions. Are you ready? No, time check, how are we doing on time? Break in 30? 20, you got it. She's the boss, so yeah, I listen to her. Okay, perfect. So really, I kind of had a question for each of you, but the themes that I've heard even when you guys were, describing your backgrounds and what we've heard from Mandy's intro really are around, culture, some of the change management, but also career, right? And so I'm gonna definitely go into some of those, but just to kind of get us kicked off, Erica, question for you. You talked about, those 3 things, which is really great. Staying true to yourself and asking for what you want. In this day and age, it can be difficult to do so, right? This often involves risk. So we have these things we call CLMs, career limiting moves, where you do something, you're kind of like, was that a CLM? Like, I don't know yet. It might have been. I'm going to just jump, right? So maybe tell me about a career limiting move or a risk that you took, and not only what it was, but what helped you make that decision?
Well, I mean, I think one of them is what I talked about is, I was fine when I was working in a role in California, right? But my first role where I actually needed to sit in New York and report in New York and lead a strategy group that sat in New York. And I asked if I could stay. I didn't really ask. Mandy was there. I didn't really ask. I just kind of like did not move. Okay? And so Mandy and I had this conversation. I was like, Mandy, you know, do you think like this is like a CLM? Like, should I actually like be moving there? And she was like, well, do you want to live in New York? I was like, no, I don't want to live in New York. And she was like, well, don't move. And so I went probably about 3 months without having a conversation of traveling, you know, meeting my team in New York, engaged in strategy, hands deep. But anytime there was a critical meeting that I needed to be live, I made sure I was live. Okay, I didn't want people to feel like I wasn't living there, even though I wasn't. And then I had a conversation with my boss, and I was like, hey, about 3 months in, but at that point in time, I really felt confident that I could have the conversation because it was pretty seamless in what I was doing. And I just said, hey, is it critical for me to move? Because I felt like I needed to address it head on, because one of the things that I was doing was traveling on work, right? Their expense, right? I was traveling to New York via expense. So I said, hey, you know, is it critical for me to live in New York? The reality is you're a little bit saving money if you don't relocate me. And my work-life balance is there, and my family is there, and that sort of everything that sort of balances me is in California. And I put him on the spot, and he was like, well, I don't think it's critical. Let's see how it works. And so that's what I did. I basically kind of, because he wasn't direct, he probably wanted me in New York, but I really just proved to him that I could do the role. So I would just say, one, that was a risk of me taking, but for me personally, it got back to me not having this career burnout, right? Where I came home and I was with my family. I had my friends. Everything that balanced me was back in California. Not that I could have made new friends in New York. I'm perfectly confident in that ability. But that would just say that was a risk. But it goes back to also being true. What I say is being true to yourself, what kind of centers you, and not being afraid to have those conversations. Is the one big thing that I would say.
Yeah, and in doing that, because interesting, a lot of people will say there was a risk in moving, relocating, and dealing with that change. You were taking a risk by staying. Was there any like FOMO, you know, fear of missing out, like, you know, you're not in there? I mean, we manage remote teams. We've talked about that, right? And that's one thing I always try to embrace, right? Is have the hallway conversations on IM, like, how's it going today? I don't need anything. I just want to say hi. You know, like, how did you deal with that fear of missing out?
So I think that's a perfect statement, is because that is a risk. There's a risk of staying when somebody wants you to be like local, but there also is a risk of like all the things you can get done in a few minutes with the intimate face-to-face connections. So what I did and what worked for me, generally I'm an extrovert. I navigate pretty well, but when I was in New York, people felt me in every way, shape, or the form, meaning that I also carved out time just to do the hallway conversation, stop by the desk, stop by people, get the FaceTime with people that I wouldn't normally have FaceTime with that were outside of my team, if that makes sense. So, you know, people that I had to influence, people that were resources to my team, people, you know, that were my boss's bosses, which are critical, people that are customers of who I was supporting. So I made sure that people felt me when I was in New York, and I think that's important. So when you are in a remote scenario, the IM is critical if you're remote. But when you do travel to that location, like, maximize the time. I was having breakfasts, dinners with people, you know, while I was there. So I would just say that's another way as well.
Cool. Thanks, Erica. Laura, I have a question for you, and this one is more around, you know, you ended kind of your intro about, you know, family is important. I mean, you had My Little Pony playing. I was like, I don't know it. It should have been the G.I. Joe theme. I would have been like, I got that one. I know that one, right? I have a 4-year-old boy, so I hear a lot of that. But so when we think about that infamous word balance and work-life satisfaction and all that stuff, we hear a lot of women talk about things that they do, and this is often like one of the number one questions I get too, right? Like, how do you do it? Tell us a little bit about your perspective on work-life satisfaction, but then also, like, What are some of the things that you do that like other people could go, gosh, I never thought of that. I could do that too.
Yeah, I like that you said satisfaction. So just a kind of little insight to my life. This morning, getting ready, I wear jeans to work. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to dress up a little bit today. I haven't dressed up in over a year. And I'm like, oh God, like clothes are a little worn, trying to get the kids ready for school. I'm fortunate my husband is a stay-at-home dad. However, it is always, we try to divide the work. And so mine is getting the kids ready. Of course, kids aren't ready because I'm trying to get ready to be presentable. I'm not going to wear the ponytail and all that. And it's total chaos. And so, of course, I'm late leaving the house. My son gets banana on me. My daughter's crying because she doesn't get to wear the shirt she wants to wear because it needs to be washed. And then Virginia Street's closed. So this is like, you know, everybody thinks they have it
Tuesday morning
together.
Right? I mean, come on.
It's like, no. And so, but I think it is. I was talking to my dad on the way in because my mom has Alzheimer's, and we just put her in a facility recently. And so one of the things that I do is I take care of my dad too. So I call him every day. He lives in Houston. And so I can relate to the parents piece, but it's hard. It's a juggle. It's not a balance. And so I always consider it more of a blending, right? So I try to find those nuggets of time, whether it's, again, the morning call to my dad. I usually call him at night too because he's pretty lonely. You know, I have a remote team. I have an employee in Buffalo, New York. I call her in the morning. I have an employee in the Bay. I call her. I'll call some of my team members in the morning or in the afternoon. You know, but the balance is, I think it's a fallacy. I mean, if you just do the math, there's 24 hours in a day. If you can get the 8 hours of sleep, okay, so that just removed 8 hours, right? You're at work. If it's an 8-hour day, I mean, seriously. So then how do you find all the rest? So I think two things for me really stand out is I don't apologize. I used to, oh, I'm sorry, I've got to leave. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got to get off this call. We were having this conversation about, you know, overhearing somebody on a call. I haven't eaten lunch yet. The cafeteria is going to close. Like, I mean, that resonates with me. Why do we feel the need to apologize as women? Men don't apologize. And I say this with all love. I love men. Men are great. But I think about it. Like, we have, you know, men in our office, if they leave early, they don't apologize. They have to go, right? Why do we feel the need that, oh my gosh, we have to apologize? You know, I can't stay late. Oh, I'll take that call from the car. I'll do whatever. So those are the kinds of things that I try to do. I try to lead by example with my team. I think it's very important. You know, I've worked for leaders before who say, oh, I want you to take your vacation days. Oh, I don't care if you work from home, but then they never do. And so to me, you know, when I worked for those folks, I felt like they were saying, well, yeah, you can do that, but you can't really do that. And so work has to be number one. And it's like, no, you know, I've said this, and some of you may have heard this from my team. You know, your boss may come to your funeral, but, you know, Jeff Immelt wasn't coming to mine.
Hey,
you know,
Laura,
Elon's not coming to mine.
Laura,
so.
that's a really interesting point. And when you think about, and I've even been in situations where I'll do that. Do you care? I'll ask the boss, you know, your first one-on-one with your new boss, like, let me get to know you. Like, this is how I like to work, how I like to get feedback. And typically I'll say I have a very, you know, flexible work schedule, right? I leave every day, I do that. But when they say, okay, yeah, no, that's good, that sounds good, I typically will ask, is it really? Like, is it really? Like, who else on your team shares this type of work schedule, right? I try to suss that out. How do you actually get that from your manager so you can, like, what are some of the things that you would recommend to say, look, if you found something that works for you, take a risk and basically don't apologize and say, hey, this is what I need to be successful.
I think that's key. I mean, I always call it the contracting conversation, right? So when you have, whether it's a new manager or a new, even coworker sometimes, right? If you're working closely together on things, you got to have that contracting conversation, and you have to be brave and courageous to call them out if you see signs that it's not really okay. And I'll share an example. So I support someone very senior in the organization, and there was a meeting one night that was supposed to happen at 5, and it kept getting moved back. And I had already told my husband, like I plan my day, right? I'm not going to be home for dinner, or I'm going to be home for dinner. So I had it already planned, and so he was okay with the 5, but when it got moved to 7, he wasn't. And so I was like, oh crap, I'm going to get, grief when I get home. Kids are going to be upset. Like, it's just not going to be a good scene. And I knew I wasn't happy either, and I was feeling that conflict. So I reached out to the admin of this person, and I said, is there any way we can move it back, or can I take it from the phone? The message she conveyed, so I stayed, we did not end up having the meeting. So that's even super fun. So fast forward 2 weeks, I can tell this person I'm supporting is a little miffed, like giving me a little bit of attitude. And so at the end, we were having a meeting. At the end of the meeting, I said, hey, can I talk to you? And I called him out on it. And I said, do you have a problem with me? And I was a little aggressive, but frankly, I was not going to put up with this crap, right? And he's like, well, you just seem to have a lot of attitude. And I said, well, first of all, I sent a text message just saying, hey, is it okay if we could move this? I go, it's nothing. He goes, I'm just questioning your commitment. And I said, it has nothing to do with commitment. And I will admit, when I get angry, I cry. And so I hate it about myself. So I got a little emotional and cried a little. But I said to him, I'm like, don't you ever question my commitment to this company. And I said to him, I left a 17-year career with GE to come here. I moved my family across the country, am living in temp housing because we haven't found a place to live yet, in a tiny apartment, and I'm doing the best that I can. I said, but you need to understand that when I make commitments, whether it's to work or home, I'm going to honor those. So don't you ever question that. If you have an issue with me, you talk to me. You don't hold a grudge and shut me out for 2 weeks. Now, the good thing is he doesn't treat me that way anymore. And so he now doesn't question it. But it took a lot of courage on my part, frankly, but I felt like I was going to, in my mind, I was fighting for my family for that.
Nice, great, thank you so much. Everybody took those notes? I know, let's go. Give her a round of applause. Don't you ever. I'm going to snap next time I say it. No, okay. All right, so Danielle, question for you. That great demonstration of great leadership, and also kind of kudos to him because he took the feedback, right? He was like, yeah, I got it, right? Which it could have gone the other way, which is why it was a risk and why you had courage, which, I applaud that as well. So Danielle, all of your experience, which is so in-depth and so broad, I mean, just amazing. Like, you could write a book. I'd read it. I'd buy it. Sally, let's partner. Let's do something here, right? I'm wondering, when you think of... I didn't even get to the internet dating one either. What the heck? Where's the time? All right, so Danielle, the question I have for you is being in so many women-led organizations, right? What are some of the 2 to 3 lessons you've learned about leadership?
So I've thought a lot about feminine and masculine leadership traits. And so Mandy had put some up here on the board. And I think that, do you ever feel like the universe is just kind of messing with you, that you keep getting the same message again and again because you didn't learn it the first time? Okay, so the one for me is that my mom was a very strong, independent female role model, and she at the time had hoped to go into business, but couldn't. I mean, she couldn't advance beyond secretary in the 60s, and so she went down the Pan Am route. And so she adopted that really strong, direct, assertive communication style. So in my family growing up, you could be happy and you could be angry. And that was it. Nothing else was tolerated. So there was a lot of anger in my house. And 2 teenagers when that was going on. And And so I think that I had two very strong masculine leadership qualities in my family growing up. And I would think, working for what I would declare as feminist organizations like Planned Parenthood and Coalition Snow, women co-founding, designing skis and snowboards for women by women. Our motto, by the way, is skis and snowboards that don't suck, because women's gear is traditionally, they shrink it and pink it, they make it softer, they water it down, and it's just like inferior quality because women aren't strong, right? So flipping all of that on the dime, right? So in these different organizations, I can think of every single organization that I've worked for, I have had a leader who was so far on the masculine qualities in their leadership that I would say it was toxic masculinity. Have any of you ever worked with a woman who's so strongly male? Yeah, okay. So the lesson in that for me is that was my upbringing and my raising, and my natural tendency is to take charge. I was the little girl who was bossy, right? I actually, in third grade, I have to share this, third grade sleepover, was playing teacher, playing school with my friends, graded their spelling bee and flunked one of my friends. Yeah, she was in tears. Yeah, okay, management skills all over. Yeah, on this one. Okay, so you like that one. So my lessons for myself is by choosing to be in organizations where I keep bumping heads with someone who is so far on the masculine qualities of traits, is that I needed to then really embrace and accept, acknowledge my own feminine qualities of leadership. And so the nurturing that I have inside, how I actually really care about the people on my team and really care about my customers and our clients, that part, I need to really emphasize that. I'm strongly a collaborative leader. I love collaborating. Of course, I learned to argue from my parents, and so that's something I still struggle with. I can be a great one-on-one active listener, but then when there's a heated argument, gosh, yeah, we'll just talk right over. I mean, so I really have to focus on that. And so I'd say conscious leadership is something that I've been really passionate about, and getting really grounded and centered in my core and who I am, and being authentic and being present and being aware of my emotions, so that I can really lead from that place where I can balance out that collaborative aspect with also speaking my truth.
Great, thank you. And then, I think it's important, all that experience, all the different leaders, you're always learning something, right? You're taking a little bit from this one, a little bit from that one, and using it to make yourself a better person and a better leader. But when we think about mentorship, right, in female-led organizations and just women in general, we need to support each other, right, and rally behind each other. I often would say, women kind of eat their own sometimes, right? We get that toxicity, and, men will show each other the shortcut, like, hey, buddy, don't go the long way. Here's a shortcut right here. And the women are like, nope, I went the long way. You can do the long way. And I had to do it in nylons, all right? And I was like, what? Seriously? Like, show me the shortcut. Like, I'll pay it forward, I promise, right? So we have to support each other, and that's really important. But I mean, we do, we don't achieve anything on our own, but we all contribute something. So I'd like to hear, just kind of as our last wrap up before our break, just a quick, who have been some of the mentors in your life, and what is the one thing that they taught you that has enabled you to succeed, but then also you've passed down? So whoever wants to go first, yeah.
I mean, I just shared them with you, be true to yourself and ask for what you want. I think that's,
yeah.
And I think, it wasn't, unfortunately, it wasn't one woman.
It doesn't have to be a woman, right? Just who specifically,
yeah,
what
so
mentor?
I had, who's still a mentor to me today. You all remember, I started at General Mills, the plant director at General Mills, his name is Andy Kortkamp. He was the one that actually said, Erica, you can have a career here in this one plant at Yoplait Yogurt in Carson, California, but you're far greater than that. And you need to look, if you're not willing to go to Buffalo, Milwaukee, or Cedar Rapids, you need to look for something outside. And so that's what actually kind of gave me the boost to actually look with outside the company. And I think that was very powerful, because he could have been like, I'm going to hoard her, keep her on my team, those sort of things. But he really had my best interests at heart. And he's someone that we talk about what you need in your toolkit. You do need these mentors and sponsors. And he's someone that he's no longer in the work environment that I play in today, but he's outside, and I can let my hair down with him on career movement. But he was the first person to kind of give me that feedback. But he also said in that, you need to do be true to yourself. And if you go to Cedar Rapids, which is where they wanted to send me, you're not being true to yourself. You're not being real to yourself. And then, you know, he was very clear when I go on the interview at PepsiCo, ask for what you want. What is it that you want? Kind of what are the roles that they have? What are you vying for? And I actually asked for a manufacturing role because that's where I came from in General Mills. But they convinced me that we think it'll be very easy for you to do the manufacturing role. We really want to get you on the other side of our business, the warehouse business. And I just listened to it. And it was very, very, thought-provoking. And they were right, actually, for me to go on the warehouse side. But that was my mentor, still a mentor today. I think it's important that you have multiple, but he was one that gave that to me.
That's great. And negotiation skills, so important, right? Especially getting mentored on that. I constantly get those late-night calls. I have this decision I need to make. How much should I ask for? You know, so.
I've been fortunate that I've had several in my life. Frankly, it started first with my parents. And, I'll give kind of 3 quotes that have kind of stuck with me in my life. My first was with my dad, and he's always like this great sounding board for me. And he said, well, what's the worst going to happen? Are they going to kill you? And I'm like, well, no. Okay, so then what are you worrying about it for? He's like, just do what you need to do. And I'm like, oh, that's great, Dad. Yeah, like that's very inspiring. But it actually is, because if you stop and think about it, because a lot of times you let fear overtake you. But if you stop and go, what really is the worst that's going to happen? You get fired? Okay, well, I got laid off in my first full-time job in HR, and I bounced back. I kind of did okay. Like, you can figure it out. Another one was a former manager of mine who later became a peer. When I went to go work for him, he actually said to me, and I was the most seasoned person on his team, but he said to me, he goes, listen, I don't want you ever to worry. There's nothing you do that I can't help you fix. So don't be afraid to take chances. And so I say that to my team because it's true, right? Especially if you have a good working relationship, right? Take a chance, go for it. As long as you're not violating the law or doing something unethical, there's really nothing that can't be fixed. So don't be afraid to kind of go for that. And my grandmother actually had a saying that I have since printed up, and I have it in my home office at home, and it's a grand life if you don't weaken. And it's like, that's just something that I always kind of come back to, and it's like, if you think about it, it's a grand life if you don't weaken. And we're all strong, and I think that's something that I want us all to remember. If you really stop, as I was thinking about coming in here, I was thinking, God, women are really strong. And what is it that makes us strong? And maybe we'll learn about the female brain and what makes us strong later. But I just think about all the things we go through as females, physically, emotionally, things that, I'm sorry guys, you go through your own challenges, right? But the physical changes our bodies go through, and then whether you have children or not, there's some things that we all go through, right? We're really, really strong. And we need to leverage that.
Nice. And I know we're going to take our break now, maybe just 30 seconds. Yep.
So I would say the theme for me is sisterhood. I've always built really strong relationships with my girlfriends and maintained them throughout my life. And what I found so amazing moving from North Lake Tahoe to Reno is the support of the female founders here in Reno. Women are authentically reaching out and saying, how can I support you? How can we collaborate on this? And so for me, I'm most inspired, I believe, by my peers who are in the arena with me and doing this work.
That's great. So we heard a lot of really good stuff. People that see the potential in us, people who provide perspective, and then really that camaraderie, right? Being able to share the same experience but build on each other. So big round of applause. We're going to have questions after the break. Thank you, ladies. You guys lived up to it. You guys are amazing. All right, and then I'll pass it over to Mandy. Oh, 10 minutes, 10-minute break, right?
I think